Hi everyone. Sorry about the extreme lateness of this video. Life's been pretty busy lately, um, just in general, and there have been a bunch of seminars. So yeah, if you're looking to attend classes, there are a lot of online Zoom seminars that you can attend. So I've been attending some of those. I've also moved to full-time from part-time work. So my time to do my side projects like this is a little less now, and I'm not really sure how that's going to affect things. I'll try and keep putting out a video a week, but we'll see. I'm not really sure how that's going to go. All right, so this week's video is going to work with balance from Seiza, or from a low crouch position. Um, yeah, let's get to it. For this week's work, you're going to need a smallish stick and a largish stick. You're not going to be putting weight on them. They're basically just going to be placeholders so you know how far out to stay when you're moving and what you're moving around. So you can use just a stick from backyard. For the large one, I used my Joe just because it was handy. But yeah, it'll be some stuff for lower on the ground and some stuff for higher up. All right. So it was recommended by one of the people who attended this class um, that it might make more sense to start with the standing because that was easier to understand. So please feel free to jump to the standing and then come back. I've kept it in the same order that it was in, not for any particular reason. This video also, there were some technical difficulties and there are a lot of cuts at the end. So I apologize for that. It was more of a discussion than the classes normally are. I probably wasn't explaining things right or something along those lines. And my video kept cutting out for them. So you'll see it after the technical difficulties. There are a lot of cuts back and forth. That's so you don't have to watch me stand around explaining something because there are lots of questions during it. Hopefully the voiceover I do will explain those questions or answer those questions. All right. To start, we're going to determine where our balance points are. So we're going to start in Seiza or knee sitting. And basically you just lean in different directions until you lose your balance. So you start to understand where your balance points are. This class was actually a request to work on balance, and we tend to work on balance from standing all the time, so this time we're going to work on it from the ground, at least for the most part. And I'm starting this one outside. It'll end up inside because the sun overheats my phone. And you're basically, like I said, you're just going as far over as you can. And you can also, if you don't want to do Seiza, you can do it cross-legged. Back will be easy, and to the sides will be easy to find where your balance point is. Forward may or may not work for you. Yes, I'm trying to experiment on here. No matter how far out I stretch my arms, pretty well balanced. So you're going to miss a little bit cross-legged, but not a whole lot. So if you can't do Seiza, it should be fine. And even in Seiza, forward's a little difficult to find a off position, off balance position, that is. On the bright side, you get to pretend to be Superman for a while, so there's that. Sorry, I should have cut out the long pause while I'm being asked a question. And right now I am not on my toes, so I'm sitting on my feet flat. This really is just to start to get a sense of where your balance is when you're sitting on the ground, because it's a little different than when you're standing. And it shouldn't take too long to get an idea. So then we're going to change to crouched, which is a lot easier to lose your balance on. Yeah, it's the same work here. Move until you lose your balance and try and go slowly so you can find the exact point. You can either even like stay right at the edge for a while and then decide to go just a little further to fall. And right now I'm catching myself when I fall. So I'm not completely falling, but I learn where my off balance position is. And by not completely falling, I mean I'm not letting myself completely fall. There you go. Boom. And you'll also probably start to notice that directly to the side is different than to the side and forward, to side and back. All those change how far you can go. And it's good to know that kind of stuff, to have a natural feeling for how far you can go before there's a problem. What your own fault tolerance is, as it were. Then go see if you can go a little further always. Right now we're not trying to correct our balance with our body, because we're actually trying to find the point of no balance, or broken balance, or whatever you want to call it. So now we're going to not stop our fall. Instead, we'll roll. We'll let our off balance go as far as possible, and then into a roll. Right now I'm doing the rolls very manual and very slow, but you can feel your balance change throughout them. And that's kind of the interesting part. At least to me right now, that's the interesting part. Oh, so I kept this in here. They were commenting on the shoes. That's all. So I decided to show them. They are very inexpensive shoes that I got, but they work well for just being in the yard and such. Sorry, I should have trimmed more out of this one. Whoops. All right, so now we're going to go up to crouching, which is easier to fall from, and we're still going to roll. So you go to your point of balance, and it's a bit more of an actual fall. From Seiza, it's a little odd because you can control yourself pretty much the whole way down. With crouching, there will be a little less that you can control. And the rolls aren't going to be anything really big and amazing during this because we're still really low to the ground. You can try rolls in different directions, off to the side, forward, back, etc. I recommend landing on muscle and not joints or bones, but to each their own. Ideally, this kind of work shouldn't hurt, especially if you practice rolling any amount. You should be able to do it on an actual surface and be perfectly fine. If not, you probably need to reassess your rolls. And you'll probably notice that the direction and how I'm falling changes my roll. But during all of this, we're still just trying to find where that balance point is, so we better understand where that is. The rolls are kind of they're basically just because I wanted to roll a little while I was outside. That's all. And it lets us actually go past our balance point to make sure that that actually was our balance point. And that we weren't just stopping early out of fear of falling or something like that. All right, now that we hopefully know where our balance points are, get a stick. I just grabbed one out of the yard. And like I said at the beginning, in the setup part, it doesn't have to be strong. What you're going to do is you're going to put your stick at what your balance point is. So you're going to lean to a point, get what your balance point is, put the stick there very lightly, and then move around it. I recommend moving in the direction you're falling, but I also recommend trying the opposite just to see if it's how it works, if it works. But my goal is to move either to or around the stick. I have changed to a different stick that's easier to see, but it's really important that you hold it really lightly, that you're not using it for your balance and you're not using it as a crutch as you try and move. And what you're trying to figure out is, once you're in this off balance position, how do you change your body so that it can move? So you can take yourself to your limit and then still move. Most of the rest of this video is going to be about how do you adjust your weight so you can move your legs and all that kind of stuff. But for right now, just play around. Try and figure out different ways. There I'm showing that I'm holding it lightly between two fingers, that I'm not using it for my support. And of course, try as many different positions as you can. So you lean to the back, you lean to the front, you lean to the sides, and all the various degrees in between. Because they will affect how you can move. Right, so there I wasn't able to actually free myself up. So I had to figure out a different way to free myself up to move around it. Turns out my direction had to change. So instead of coming in front of it, I went behind because I was able to free up the leg to move. And I mean, this should give you more freedom when you're doing groundwork. Hopefully helps you better understand where your weight is and how to change where your weight is, things like that. So there, all my weight is on the left leg, which makes the right leg light. So how do I adjust enough to move around? And it really is an exploration right now. AKA, don't mimic. Find lots of different things to try. Trial and error is your friend. There, it was showing that you don't need to use your hand. You can use your free hand, but you don't have to. And of course, you want to be able to do both, or understand how to do both, so you have more options. All about the options. So that was big motion. Is there anything in what you were doing to move around it that you can reduce? Basically just remove the excess movement as much as you can. So this part led to a bunch of questions of how do you free up your leg to move, basically. So we're going to try using our hip versus using our core. Both are ways to do it. And if you've watched previous videos, you've heard me rant enough, you know that I don't really consider moving from the hip, moving from the core. They're different things. Neither one's better or worse than the other. They're just different tools. So for me, the core would be a little behind the lower abs and in front of the lower back. That muscle, that set of muscles and organs and all that, moving that, specifically moving the muscles, in order to pull the rest of the body. Versus turning, or using my hip muscles to turn my hips to move the body. So that was hip. And this is core, and the way I can move is different. To me, core, moving the muscles of the core, because of all the directions they can move and the ways they can move, it gives you more options. But moving the hip is a lot easier for people to understand most of the time. So try both. So there, that was core. The one before it was hip. And it really is what's leading the motion. So to move the, guessing this is going to be hip. Yeah. So I turned the hip away. And then for the core, I pull my guts inward so that the leg gets freed up. Both can do the same goal, just in different ways. So there you saw the left hip turned back into the ground, which freed up my right leg. There, my core pulls inward onto the, what would that be? That would be the right leg so that the left leg can move. No. Onto the left leg so the right leg can move. Sorry. And there are other ways to solve the same problem, right? I could pull my core away. The one before it, I pulled the left hip back and away instead of towards. So really try different motions with them to solve the problem. Because I'm pretty sure most problems have way more than one solution. The big problem you're going to be solving is how do you get enough weight off of at least one leg so you can move it and get towards the stick. try different ways of moving, as I've said a bunch of times so far. And that was core. So now that was in Seiza. Now we're going back to our crouch. Our balance is more precarious, but our freedom of motion is greater. It's a smaller point of contact. So it's easier to rotate the hip to free a leg. And it's also going to be easier to pull your core. That was hip. And that's core. You can see in addition to me pointing it out, you can see the abs pull inward, which then, of course, turns the hip, but it's not the hip driving the motion. The hip comes along for the ride, basically. Here I believe I'm being asked, how do you turn the hip or how do you move the core? Oh, if the weight's forward. So you can rotate your hip upwards, because it's not just left and right. Sorry, that's what the question was. It was a comment about the hip not being able to move many directions, whereas the core can. But the hip can turn up and down. It's just not a motion we use as often. Still, the control of the core for me gives me more options. But you may or may not find that to be true. So there I pulled everything back so I could step behind. I could also push the hip around so I can turn. I could turn the hip inward to free up the leg. I could pull my core downward to free up the leg. So now we're going to focus a little bit more on the hip, because we're going to try and kick towards the stick. We're staying in crouching. But it's a question of, for this, how do I release enough weight on my left foot so I can kick towards that stick instead of trying to move around it. So there, I dropped my core a little and pulled my right hip back so that my left leg could spin through. And I moved back to the lighter stick just to show that I'm not putting weight on the stick. So there you can see the hip turned. Here, trying forward, trying to figure out how to solve it, and also showing that there's no weight on it, but the weight is on my right hand leg. The hip rotated slightly back so I could bring the left leg forward. Then you can try rotating the hip left, right, forward, back. You can tilt it up, tilt it down. All of those will change how your weight in your body is oriented. And you have to figure out what one works for the situation until you have more of a natural grasp of it, right? And you can do the same with the core. So my phone had heated up so much that they couldn't see any video and it was frozen. So I moved inside and we went back to the same work. So there, if you saw, everything turned inward so I could lean over to the leg and release the other leg. Yeah, you see that turn inward? That allows me to put weight on one of the legs instead of the other, because I'm off balance and I'm basically correcting my balance in the direction I'm falling. And this is also where we get lots of cuts, because there are lots of questions being asked. That one, not so good. So there was a question, one person felt like their knee was getting torqued. So a way to make sure that, or a way to reduce that, is to now lean over to one side. And then that leg, the other leg, is free. And I'm actually leaning towards the direction I'm turning instead of turning around my leg, which reduces the torque on it. And this is kind of a rule of thumb. It's a lot easier if you go in the direction that you're falling instead of going against it. It reduces torque, it makes life easier. It's probably good to try both, but I tend to go more with the direction of force instead of against it. Also remember to hold the stick lightly. It is just a placeholder of where the edge of your balance is. And it's a goal to move towards, or in this case, kick towards. But you can see how I'm off balance and I correct my balance to go to one side to free up what needs to move forward. Yeah, the forward I need to work on. So, one person was having problems and they were leaning back, which makes it really difficult to do anything. But they were trying trying to keep themselves from falling, so their waist moved back and out from under them. But then you can't change your weight, and you're kind of stuck. So instead, for me at least, I correct. There I'm showing a way that you could, with your hips back, move the leg out, but it's easier for me to bring everything towards the direction I'm going to go, and then figure out how to free up a leg. So you can see part of my body pulls down towards the leg that I want to be heavier, so that the other leg's lighter. And that was the core pulling it in. That was the hip going back. And that was me trying to show that once you free up the hip, you can spin basically towards it. But you also want to be able to have the ability to be very controlled with all of it. So now we're going to try really hard to use our core instead of just the hip kicking, which means I pull everything in. So my squat becomes way more balanced. That would be hip. That's core. They look a little different, but like I said before, both can get to the same goal. But I tend to, for this exercise at least, I tend to crunch my core together in order to move. Basically bring all of my balance back to one spot. And that was me showing you can try and push out the other way, but for me it's more difficult. Probably means I should try it more, try and figure it out. So now we're just going to go back and forth with the hip and the versus core to try and figure out the differences between them. So that pulls in. I can then shift over to one leg, and the other leg is free. And here, the whole core is pulling inward, so that I can basically pull my whole body back to itself, versus that, which would be the hip, where I can turn the hip in a direction. There, the whole core pulls together. There, hip, turns to release the leg. There, the core, turns to just, well, pulls in to pull everything together. All right, now for the standing part, which I was told makes more sense. which is probably true. So find our off balance position. We turn the hip so that we can move our leg inward. There was the left hip turning back to free the leg. Balance point. That's core. So my core compresses inward to free the leg. I was going to play some joke sexy music during this because, hey, showing some leg. But I didn't. Sorry. Not super motivated on that. So the question was, am I torquing the knee? Which is why I'm trying to show that the knee doesn't get torqued with it. Because the hip comes up, there's not enough weight on it. So there's no torquing of it. At least for the core stuff, that's the way it works. For me, the hip can be a little different. Because if I start the turn with the hip, that tends to torque things for me. If I start with the core, it pulls everything in so I can determine how to protect things. Yeah, so that second one was the core, the first one before it was the hip. And it changes your foot some. Technically, if you're good with either, you should be able to keep yourself protected, I'm assuming. But to me, they're different. So, there's a question about turning on the toe versus the heel. And how do you change your body with them? So here I'm turning on the heel, so I pull my body back. And then if I wanted to turn on the toe, I have to push my body forward and turn. So heel, back, really easy, no torque for me. Toe, in order to not get torque through the knee. That one was bad. That torqued it. But you have to change how you turn on your toe. Right? So there I roll my foot. This is as I'm thinking through it and figuring it out. It gets a little better. There. That's a little better than the previous one. You'll notice the knee was not being torqued as much as I roll from one side to the other to mimic what's happening with the hip, with the heel, which is a lot easier to roll on just because of the shape. So it starts on one side, rolls to the other. It was that, or you keep a very small point for your toes, like basically the joint where the big toe is, and turn on that. That is another option. Or you roll from one side of the foot to the other. And I recommend carefully trying both. When you're trying to figure out if something torques a joint, go slow, go careful. Just so you don't injure yourself while you're figuring it out. So there, I'm trying to demonstrate the rocking, basically from big toe to little toe, but along the meat of the foot. And yeah, the core pulls everything in, so there's not a lot of weight on that foot. So I can then turn it. I may even be able to just pick the foot up. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and try it again. Depends how much of my weight I can get off that leg. So now we're trying going forward versus back a little bit. Like, do you pull your body back? Do you push it forward? Do you sink down to the ground? Each of those will change what happens and change whether or not your knees get torqued and such. So try them all. And figure out what works best for you. And then know a bunch of things that work okay but not the best that you can use when you need to. All right. That's about it. Hopefully it made at least a little bit of sense. Thanks. See you next time.